Hello, everyone, and welcome to Handmade Hero, the show where we code a complete game live on stream. We are in the middle of doing some gameplay coding here. We're basically trying to set up our entities and get our sort of understanding of how creatures move through the world working in preparation for writing what we want the gameplay to feel like and be like. So in order to do that, I've sort of... we didn't really get the chance to do what I wanted to do on the previous stream because I had a stupid bug that was one of those bugs where it's not a bug. Something's actually doing what it was supposed to do, but you forget that you put something in another place, and so you think something you wrote is behaving incorrectly, and you go search and you can't find the bug, and of course it's because there is no bug. It's actually you were using something completely wrong, and the bug is actually back in completely unrelated code that has nothing to do with it. So we spent a bunch of time chasing our tails on that for no apparent reason. But what are you going to do? I mean, that's the nature of bugs, right? If they always happened in the places that you thought they would, then debugging wouldn't be hard, right? There'd never be any skill to that, I suppose. But anyway, that's settled now, but we still got to do the stuff that is what I actually wanted to do, which is push a little harder into exactly how we're moving the people around so that we can make some certain guarantees about what happens when they move. So today is day 285, so if you want to go ahead and follow along with today's episode, day 284 is the source code to start with. We're also using a new version of 4Coder today, which I don't have very much experience with. Basically, the main difference with it is there's a new indentation pass in there. So now, like, hopefully this will fix some of the indentation problems we were having, because it's sort of new and improved indentation over what we were using. There's also some things that I haven't really looked into yet. Like, for example, I don't usually use scroll bars. It has scroll bars now. I don't know if you can turn them off. So at some point we'll have to do a stream where we actually go through and, because there's like new UI basically that you can access in 4Coder, some of which is on by default, and I don't necessarily know how to turn it off. So there's a couple things in there that might be a little unusual, but we'll deal with them as they come. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and open up. Oh, and another thing that's kind of cool is now you can interact with these things in kind of a nice way too. But that's beside the point. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and open things up here and get us going. And over the course of the stream, we'll take a look at how the indentation stuff is going. And hopefully we can find, if there's any problems with the new indentation, we can sort of isolate what is the reason, like where in the Handmade Hero code was the indentation wrong. And that way Alan will actually have some kind of a solid case that he can use to debug it, right? Because the thing with indentation is it's very context specific, so it's like, if you're just like, it's not indentating braces right sometimes, well, that's not very helpful for a programmer, because they're like, okay, like, what times? So if we can sort of, I'm hoping that we can use the stream as sort of a thing of like, when we see an indentation happen, we'll be like, okay, there's an indentation problem, so, and you can use exactly that code to see what was occurring, right? All right. So where we left things off was we've got this sort of notion of the player moving around, right? And the player is moving, and they can move on to points, and they will move with the points when those points move. And in general, the part that I didn't get to do, because that's sort of working now, obviously. The part that I didn't get to do that I wanted to do was I would like it so that when I move on to points, those points understand that I am the person who is on the point, and then if somebody else wanted to move on to that point, I would not be able to do so, right? I'm sorry, they would not be able to do so. And so we just want to get a little simple transactional system going on there that would be, what we... that will allow us to do that testing. And also I can sort of stop with the angled things for the moment in the rooms, because I don't really want that in there. We're not really working on that part right now. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off that sort of angled fact that the room is on a sort of a slant, a gradual slope. So if we just take out this line, then the offset z for things that we build will just be 0, which is what we want. And then we've got kind of a flat room and we can hop around on normally, right? And we've still got our little dude here, so in case we want to try hopping onto the moving guy, if I time it so that it's there when I hop over, then I can kind of get on it. And so we'll leave that in there because there's no reason not to have that for anything that we might want to test. So off we go. All right, So what I want to do now is I want to start, again, making this sort of concept of standing on be a little bit more sort of specific. And in order to do that, I'm going to need some sort of a registry, basically. I'm going to need some sort of a conceptualization of who is standing on what, so that when you are standing on something, the sim region understands that, and the sim region will not allow anyone else to go there, or if you do want to go there, it can tell you, oh, that's empty, you can go, whatever. So we basically need some code that's going to start tracking this, and so that's something that we have to write. Now, there's a couple of different ways that we could do this. Obviously, we could do this in the unpacked entity itself, and that might be the best place to do it, because since you have to know what traversable, you had to have found a traversable in the first place, it probably makes sense to just store who is standing on it right there, and during the unpack process is a pretty easy place for us to do that. So it seems like something pretty straightforward. I think that's probably the easiest way to go. So let's take a look at how that would work. So all right, let's see here. Well, looks like we have a for-coder issue of some kind on switching windows. I don't really know. I'm able to edit in here, but I'm not able to edit in here. It's a little odd. Yeah, it looks like I'm not able to edit in the second window, which is weird. Not sure what would be the cause of that. I guess it's okay. I don't really need to edit in the second window. But I'll definitely have to track down what that is. It might be a problem with my config file too. I mean, I do the weird modal stuff implemented entirely in my config file, and I don't really know to what extent that may have sort of deleterious effects. So let me just see, can I edit in any... Yeah, so in this pane, everything seems to be fine, and there doesn't seem to be any weirdness. So we'll just keep going. All right, so if I go to the sim region stuff, oh wait, I guess we actually have it in entity now. So if I go to the entity stuff, we have the concept of the traversable point inside the collision volume. And what I could do here is if I want to, I could say this is a particular entity that lives on this traversable point, right? So I could say that there's an entity reference, for example, and the entity reference stands on here. Now, I don't really need to pack this information because the entity themselves know who they're standing on, right? So really all I need to do is just store the entity pointer. And when this gets packed down, eventually that pointer could just be thrown away. Because it only has to be it only has to be valid during the sim region, and nobody else has to ever look at it. And then during pack unpack, we can just write that pointer. I guess during pack we don't do anything. We just omit it when we're saving it, streaming out the data, and on unpack we update it, right? So basically, during the world pack operation, when we do pack entity into chunk, when we do pack traversal reference, pack entity reference, that stuff, we don't need to do any particular operations here because that pointer eventually will just get thrown away. But inside sim region, when we do the unpack, which probably to be symmetric, we should move into the world, I'm guessing. Either that or move everything out here. Well, we need during creation time to pack, so I guess we'll see what happens there. But during the unpack, which is right here, when we call that an entity and we want to do the unpacks for it, right, which I guess is this here. I'm sorry, that's wrong. It's in the second pass. It's in connect entity pointers. When we load the traversables, what we would want to do is during that load, we want to, instead of just loading the entity reference, after we load the entity reference, that's what we're standing on, we would want to look and see if the entity that we ended up loading is valid. Then we want to actually write to that entity's collision volume, and we want to say whatever your traversable was that we're talking about here, we want to update it so that it knows that whatever, it knows who's standing on it, right? The person who's standing on it at that point is us. So we need to know, when we do this load traversal reference, we need to know like the source entity, where it came from, and we need to put that in here during the unpack, right? So let's go ahead and fix the, I guess it's the pointer version here. Is that a dot? No, that's an arrow. Traversables is not a member. That's because I spelled it wrong. And so in here, when we're loading this out, we know what entity it is because that's how we're getting the data in the first place. And so, yeah. So now when we load, we should be updating those pointers correctly, right? And so what we could do now to see what happens when we hop around is I'm going to color those points based on whether they have a pointer set so that we can see what's happening, right? And it'll be wrong at first because we never clear them. But, you know, at least this way we'll be able to see that happening as we work on the code. So I'm going to do that before I write anything else. So let's see. Here is the code for drawing the traversable index. Why? When we do a push rect outline, oh, because they don't have any colliders on them, that's why. So when I do a push rect here and draw this traversable, what I want to do is say, well, here's what the color was of this traversable. Oh, dude, that is nice right there. That's actually doing much better indent. It used to indent just back to the thing. That's awesome. That's real cool. Roll. I'm a fan. All right, anyway, so what I want to do here is say, okay, if the traversable point, if it had a standing on, or, you know, maybe we'll call that occupier, let's say. If there's an occupier for this traversal point, I'll just draw it in a different color. So instead of being in sort of that, I don't know, inoffensive beige orange thing, I'll just go ahead and draw it in a blue color so that we can see it. And then I'm going to change the traversable point definition to just be occupier here and fix that in the places where that was being used before. All right. Okay. So I guess I would be a liar if I said I expected those all to change immediately, because I would think that those would be set to nothing initially. But I guess we don't clear them at first. I'm not real sure what's going on there. Oh, you know what? That's because they're shared. These are actually, these collision points are actually shared. So I suppose this is not really a safe way to do that, right? It actually needs to be, it would need to actually be on the entity itself, right? The entity has to have knowledge of who would be in there. So that kind of raises an interesting question for us, right? We have kind of an open question here, which is, do we want to continue sharing these things, or do we want to stream them out, right? Meaning, do we want that data to be included? And it's kind of a difficult question. The reason it's a difficult question is because the data's not that big, right? You know, if it were 64K of collision data, then you'd probably want to share it. But since we don't really have that kind of situation, it's kind of a question as to whether I want to multiply it out. So you can see what the problem is, right? The problem is that this is actually a shared structure. Everyone shares, like, it's what kind of collision group are you? Oh, I'm this kind of collision group, right? And so the question is, do we want that to be written out as part of the entity so that the entity itself has, you know, a particular, can have an arbitrary collision group as it goes? And so that's like kind of a tricky question. And my gut instinct says that since the idea behind this is that things can be very sort of permuted and configurable and weird in this game, and that I'm trying to go for very very expressive organic entity system, that probably what you would want to do is, rather than solving this problem by storing the occupiers as a separate thing, I think maybe the better thing to do would be to actually have the traversable points be new things in every entity, and that they're not shared, so that they can be moved around and changed per entity in various ways. I don't know. That's just my gut feeling. Normally I wouldn't make that call, and the reason is because I feel like a lot of the traversables are going to be the same, right? Like most ground tiles are going to have it just at 0, 0, 0. So, you know, it's shared. On the other hand, hey, you got to store 8 bytes potentially. Well, I guess we could compress that down to an index into a table. So I guess it wouldn't have to be. You know, we could store a byte, I suppose, for it, versus having to store, 16 bytes or something like this, or 12 bytes to store the location otherwise. Yeah, it's a tough call. It's a tough call. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this be a property of the entity. And I guess what I could do is say, let's not make it a property of the collision group yet, so we can still share collision groups for now, and we can think about that a little bit more. But let's make the traversables be a property of the entity and go from there. Okay, so traversable point is not going to be inside a collision group. It's just going to be stored off the entity, and that way things like the occupiers can be on it directly. Now this is kind of interesting, and probably I would like to handle this actually directly right now if possible, rather than doing anything else with it. Because one thing we could do is say, oh, there's a hard-coded number of these, right? And then everything that we have right now would just work. And I guess, I'll do that first, just to get it working, I suppose. But then I think maybe this is a good time, since the point of what we're doing right now is to work on the entity system. I think maybe now's a good time to make that a flexible array, right? So it can change how big it is, and if we need it to, right? Every entity can have a different number of these. So let's go ahead and make that happen. In getSimSpace traversable now, instead of going through the collision, it'll just rock right off of the traversables here. And this, so all of these just get a little simpler. They're axing directly off of the entity, and they don't have to look at the volume group anymore. So let's take a look at this code. Doesn't really need to access that anymore. The volume group is not relevant at all. Entity is undeclared. That's true. It's test entity. My bad. Traversable count. So in here where we do make simple for collision, we're going to still want this code. So I'm going to have to go ahead and grab that out. But it's not going to be on simple floor collision anymore. It's going to be like where we actually add the simple room, or what is it, make simple room? Remember what that function is called. Standard room. So it's going to be in here where we create one of these floor collision grounded entities. When we create that entity, we're going to have to give it the traversable that it needs, right? So in here, we're going to have to say that the entity traversable 0 is going to be, what it is, and the entity traversables 0 occupier is also nothing, right? But that's about it. And so after we do that, I think we would be in a situation where now we're all good to go. And if we run, we should, I think, be exactly the same as we were before. And, oh. Or not. That was unexpected. Oh, I only added it to one case. Oh, that's kind of magical. I mean, you can see what happened there, right? I didn't add one to the other one, so I only added it to the magic one that moves up and down. So it immediately had to hop the guy over because that was the closest collider. That was the closest place he could stand. That's funny. All right, but yeah, point being, we want to add this in either case, certainly. And then we should be back to normal. So now as we go, you can kind of see as I'm moving around, I'm sort of Pac-Manning these up in a sense. As I hop on them, you can see they're changing to have their occupier pointer set. Now, like I said, the problem here, of course, is that having the occupier set, it will never get cleared, because right now all we're doing is doing it on the when we actually move the guy, we're not actually dealing with updating that information. Instead, all we're doing is setting it on unpack, so the person moved, if they moved on the previous frame during unpack of this frame, it gets set. That's not going to cut it, and it also doesn't help us with the thing we're actually trying to do yet, which is prevent two people from occupying the same square. So what we need to do now is we need to start introducing the notion of checking to see when you would have occupied a new square. You're going to have to check to see whether it's allowed or not. So let's go ahead and look at that code. By the way, how am I now suddenly editing in this window again? So what happened? There must have been some kind of weird bug that froze up the editing or something, or maybe I got into some kind of mode. But it's weird because this window was not working before, but it's working now, right? Didn't notice when that happened, but it did. So anyway, in this code base, right now we don't have a very good notion of hero head. We don't have a very good notion of like asking that permission. All we're doing is just straight up setting it, right? So if we look at what happens in here, you can see us setting it, this moving to this traversable. This is essentially the problem, right? This is not what we want to do. So when we're about to set this, we want to do some kind of a transaction here where we say we would like to move here. Can we move here? And so the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to do some kind of thing like transactional occupy or something like this. And I'm just going to say, this is what I would like to do, right? I would like to take this moving to, I'm this entity. I would like this slot in me to transactionally occupy this this traversable, please. And so I'll have that piece of code return to me whether or not it's okay for me to do that. And if it is, then we'll initiate the hop. If it's not, then we won't. And honestly, I probably want two ifs for this because eventually the controller is going to have to take different action, possibly, depending on because one of them, in this situation, we're not trying to go anywhere if this turns out to be a failure. If this turns out to be a failure, we were trying to go somewhere, we just couldn't, right? And so we're probably going to need to know the difference of those cases, so I'm going to leave them as separate ifs for now. So I'm going to compile that, and it'll tell us that a transactional occupy is not going to happen. And then in here, what I'll do is I'll say, okay, inside the sim region, where we've got move entity, we've got sort of another operation here, which is transactional occupy, which is something that is just going to allow, an entity to or not to, I guess that's a bool, to or not to switch up a traversable. So this is, it's the thing that's actually getting modified here is going to be entity traversable, a traversable reference. And that's what's going to get updated. And this is this traversable here is a separate reference. Oops. Which is the desired, right? That's the thing we want to occupy. So the first thing is first, we need to check whether the desired position, and I believe, so when we have one of these traversable references, let me take a look at entity. Oops. When we have one of these traversable references, it tells us what the entity is, and it tells us what the index is. So we need to then go figure out whether that traversable is occupiable or not. And I guess inside the sim region, we've got the get sim space traversable, but we don't actually have a way to just get a traversable. And so I think we probably want to Um, I think we probably want to move these out. Well, all right. I'm just going to do it one step at a time because I'm not sure. First thing I'm going to do is say, well, I want to be able to get traversable points back easily. So I want to do get traversable. And in here, be able to pass one of those references sort of cleanly. So in here where we say get traversable with one of these entity references, I'm just going to go ahead and do this, right? So this is going to be a pointer, and I'm going to grab it like that. And this way there's an assertion there too to kind of guard that array access if it's, if somebody's doing something stupid. We'll catch them. And I'm going to also allow you to call it exactly as the other one, manual currying. Welcome to it. So in here, we're just going to say traversable reference. And that's just going to call get traversable with the reference entity pointer and the reference index. Okay. So in this case now, what we need to do is we need to actually get this. So we need to get the entity traversable point. And when we get that traversable, I guess I'll call this desired and desired ref. So I'll take that desired point and I'll get the reference from it. Or rather, I'll get the point from the reference. And then I want to see if it's occupied. Right? The result of this function will assume that I cannot occupy the square. In the case where it is not occupied, now I can occupy the square. And I'll say, okay, the occupier is now whatever the entity is that was trying to occupy the square. And similarly, wherever we were occupying previously, we want to relinquish, right? So the traversable reference, that's the destination here, is now going to not have an occupier on whoever it was. So we've got another entity traversal point in the mix. The entity traversal point is the dest point. I'll call get traversable on that. And I guess I'll just call this dest and dest ref to be sort of the same with it there. So the dest occupier now becomes nothing. Nobody's occupying that point anymore. And in addition, I need to set the dest reference. I need to set it to be equal to the desired reference. I think that's mostly everything that needs to happen. Right? Now, it's possible that the destination is uninitialized. And if the destination is uninitialized, then we would assume that dest would return 0. And I probably want that to be a legal case, right? So inside Handmade sim region, I probably want to do a check here where we say, like, okay, when you do get traversable, then maybe we assume here that the result is 0. And then we only, if there's a valid entity pointer, actually retrieve the value, if that makes sense. Similarly, now this guy can totally piggyback off the case of get traversable. I guess, so maybe I'll make this guy safe as well. Oops. I'm not sure to what extent I actually want to do that. So I think here's what I'll do. I'll say that we've got an entity traversable point result, and we'll assume to begin with that the result P is going to be equal to the entity P. So in the case where things fall apart, we'll still be okay. We will get the traversable point by calling getTraversable on this entity in this index. And if the result that we get back, and I guess I should say point. When we get the result back, I will check to see if it was valid. If it is, then I'll add the that point's displacement in, and leave it at that, right? We'll see how that goes. All right, so oops. So that's all good. There's one sort of touchy aspect of this that I'll talk about in a second, but and you know, to the degree to which we care about it might be different. So it looks like I'm not actually. Why am I not moving the body? Am I returning? Oh, because I didn't set it to true ever. So when we actually do the transaction, it goes without saying that if I never return true, we'd be in bad shape. So in the case where it's unoccupied, I need to actually return true so that someone will actually move off of it, right? Okay. So now I have a couple problems, I think. I'm not actually sure if I do or if I don't. But I believe I have a couple problems that I have to address. So the first problem is, I think both of these, like, I don't really know to what extent the head occupies a point versus the body occupying a point. Because before it looked like they were both occupying points. So I'm wondering, does the head keep a stand on? Because I think it does. There we go. So I'm wondering what the hero head, if the hero head ever sets any of these. It doesn't. All right. So there's one problem I have is, like I said, the one problem I have is that when I if how should I explain this? So right now we don't distinguish between things like moving to, which is not actually occupying a thing necessarily, and standing on, right? So I'm not sure. Look, we're gonna have to do a little bit more work to make transactional occupy do what we need it to do. When the head goes over to the side and you're about to hop into it, right? We only, once we start taking the square, we're sort of in between two squares, and I don't know to what degree we relinquish that other square. If we relinquish it right away, I don't know, there's stuff, it's a little complicated, I guess is what I would say. It's a bit tricky. And the degree to which I have moving to and standing on, I've got to think that through a little. The more immediate problem is when we do our unpacks in here, where we do load entity reference, and load traversable reference. So part of the problem is I really don't want to do this, probably, this occupier thing, for anything other than like standing on, like what the thing is that you're on, right? It's like which one you're occupying is kind of, I'm going to have to draw this out. So here's essentially the problem. How much time we got left? We got about 20 minutes. All right. So here is the hero. And for the hop, we had two things. One, we had standing on, and the other we had was moving to. Now, the problem that we have here is we probably only want to occupy one square at a time, or maybe we don't. Maybe we occupy both, I don't know. But at some point we have to relinquish this square, and at some point we have to take this square, and what we do know, if this is A and this is B, what we do know that in time, if I was to look at like two channels essentially in time, and be like, this is showing me occupation, I'm starting out occupying A, and then at some point I have to release A, right? And then I have B, and I know that I end occupying B. All I really know is that this point here has to either be right on when I release A or sometime before it, right? There can't be a gap between here and here, right? There can be an overlap, so I could do it like this, or they can be right on, but I couldn't have empty space, right? I couldn't do this, because if I did this, then in here, someone could occupy the squares, and then I would have nowhere to land, right? There'd be nowhere to go if someone was allowed to like come in and take the old square, but then the new square became occupied. I would, that's an unacceptable scenario, basically. So the question is just, what's the actual procedure for that, right? And right now I'm taking both squares, and that's not good because I'm not releasing the moving to one ever. So the question is just, what should I do here? Should I always occupy one? I'll move it to here, and then the thing that I do the jump just remembers an old position, but it doesn't actually it doesn't actually occupy that position, if that makes sense. I don't know. I'm not sure. So let's play with it, because when I don't know, I play around, and I see what makes the most sense in the code, right? So let's switch over to entity. And I guess what I'm going to do with entity is say, well, all right, let's suppose that I only keep one square ever. So I never take more than one square, or if I do take more than one square, then I'm an entity who always takes more than one square all the time. Like I just have a footprint that's larger, right? And that's just how I work or something. Although I don't know to what degree I really want that to happen in this game, but whatever. Maybe certain boss monsters, right? So I've got these traversable references, and I'm saying that I'm going to occupy particular squares. And what I want to do is say, well, okay, I've got this notion that I'm occupying one of them, and I'm just going to call that occupying. And then I'm going to assume that I just have a thing that was like came from. Okay. And then what I'm going to say is only occupying actually occupies. The other one doesn't, right? And so if I come through here and say, well, okay, we've got pack traversable reference standing on and moving to. When we pack these can be, these are not. Oops, moving from. Wait, what did I call it? Came from. All right. That's hop. That error condition seems to hop. Oh, I'm not. Oh, that's weird. I think I may have a bug, and I think I may have to update my my four-coder custom for the new UI stuff, because I noticed my jump to script doesn't always actually seem to go get into the buffer where the error is. I think I may have to do something. See that? It didn't actually hold the colon. So I have to look at how that works. I'm not sure what's going on there. Yeah, well, anyway, something to look at later. So load traversable reference is going to be the same, but basically what I want to do here is say, well, when we connect these up, I'm going to say that load traversable reference doesn't do this automatically, right? So maybe this is actually, it only happens down here, right? So load traversal reference doesn't need the source entity. That's not actually required. And so when this happens, after it loads occupying, it will update in here. So it'll say like, okay, I loaded occupying, assuming that entity occupying has an actual pointer associated with it, then it'll do the entity occupying. And these don't. These anymore. Oops. There we go. And source entity is now entity. Standing on is occupying. So we're probably going to need a creation time system for guaranteeing no overlapping occupation, right? There we go. So now let's take a look here. So this is assuming that occupying is not the same. Then we're going to want to do a transactional thing for occupying with the traversable, but we're going to need to save that one that we're, our sort of our came from, if you will. So before we do that, we're going to want came from to equal our old occupying, pretty much regardless, because it should have been equal anyway. So then in here, when we're going to be adjusting the location of the entity during standing, that'll just be this. And movement to and movement from is going to be basically the same, but now it's a little bit reversed. So we're always, the occupying value is always where we're going to. And what we're moving from is the came from value. Then when we finally land, then we want to set came from equal to occupying, like so. So really, this line may be redundant. That may not ever really need to happen, but it certainly can't hurt. Famous last words. So now you can see that the blue is working the way that I wanted it to, right? As I come sort of through there, I'm basically moving to that point as soon as my head crosses into it, and then the hop happens. What I'm interested to know is, let's say, what if we dropped another hero in here? I'm going to introduce a key so I can drop new heroes in, because I think that might just be helpful for us for when we're, sort of working on stuff. So what I'd like to be able to do is basically like redo the add player. So you can see in here where we do this like was plus controller start add player situation. I'm going to go ahead and just put that in sort of the game UI normally. So when you have an entity index already, I'll make it so that you can drop another one in there using some kind of something. Maybe that is, I don't know what that would be. I don't know which keys we really have either. Well, for now, let's just say maybe we'll take one of the debug keys and use that. I don't know. Well, yeah, I just don't know. So in here where we do entity index add player, I don't want to double add the player in this case. And so maybe, you know, I don't know if the else button would be a problem here. Let's take a look. Oh, we're going to have to zero out that velocity. Amusingly, I can hit him and he bounces. I guess we put our physics in there for that. That's kind of weird. All right, so essentially we got what we wanted. And we have to work on our controllers a little bit, but this actually works exactly right. So I have to skip that point if it's occupied. And right now, since the head is allowed to move as far from the body as it wants, it can always go find another point, right? That's so grotesque. But otherwise, yeah, it's all good. So that's exactly what I wanted. And I think, I'm trying to think about, I guess, let's double check that I didn't break startup with that change in the way that these guys work. Yeah, I did. Because we simulate the start button press there, and it won't think any heroes exist when we do this. Let's take a look at the code a little further down and look at the heroes exist situation. So, you know, we could do that in here, and maybe that would be a smarter thing. That code is still, it's kind of a little janky. We probably want to make it more explicit anyway. I feel like that should have worked. But I'm not really sure why that didn't. So heroes exist assumed to be false. We come through here, we take a look. Hero gets created by doing an add player, and it saves the entity index in here, right? It doesn't do this code, but that should be okay, right? Because you shouldn't have to... Wait, what? Oh, right. So it should be fine, you would think. And then when you come through here, you say, all right, let's go through all the entities, and, you know, we update the entities. And when we go through and we see the hero head, we should, I mean, I guess I could do it up here even, but either way, it should just work, right? There shouldn't be, it should not have thought that there were none. So I'm kind of interested to know what's happening there. I feel like something's not quite the way I expected. And again, this is sort of a little bit janky. The way that we had this coded, we probably want something a little bit nicer. But I just want to understand why it doesn't work. So let's just step in, I guess. Oh, because the simulation has started already. Yeah, that's why. So that entity is not actually added into the world during this add player. It's added into the storage for the world, and that's just basically a bug. Like, we don't really want to do that. So add player needs to add to the simulation, right? So that's just bad, and I probably should fix that right now before it gets any more out of hand. So add player should not be doing any of this stuff really. It should not be doing end entity or any of that stuff. What it should be doing is it should do like an immediate unpack into the sim region. So the sim region, excuse me. The way that the sim region works when it unpacks stuff, what we basically want to be able to do is have there be an add entity operation which effectively mirrors what happens when you begin sim, and then when you call end entity in here, right? We could just say, well, are we in a sim or aren't we? And if we're in a sim, so we can use the same code in both places. If we're in a sim, we unpack into the sim. If we're in and if we're not, we don't. I think that's what we actually want to do here. So what we could do is say, well, okay, there's world mode. If world mode, active sim or something like this, then we do one path. Else we do the other path. Something like that. And so in here, I guess I would say, well, let me think about this a little bit longer. Probably should wrap up very soon here, but I'm just not sure exactly how I want that to go. So inside the sim region, we just need this one piece of code, right? This add entity here. And when we add an entity and we're passing it sort of that packed data, there's two things we could do. One is we can still pack and then ask it to unpack into a temp buffer, right? And that would follow the same path with the same unpacking. And that's kind of nice because then we know there are no surprises. Yeah. On the other hand, it's definitely less efficient than if we just wrote directly into one of the new sim slots, right? Because instead we could just do an add entity and say, here's where we're going to add the entity, and let's go ahead and write directly to it. I'm not sure. I mean, the other thing we could say is that things always get added at the end of the frame anyway, so effectively they get packed into chunks and then unpacked. Maybe that's not really a problem. Maybe that's fine. Yeah, I don't know. I really don't. I'm not sure what to make of that. I guess here's what I'll say. For now, the fix is pretty easy. It's obviously heroes exist whether if we've created one, if there's not. I guess now that I think about it, the way that we're doing it, where we pack them and then unpack them, is actually possibly correct. Like, I mean, that's actually kind of nice. So I don't know. Maybe I just want to keep it that way. It's very symmetric, doesn't require any changes to the code, and you know you're always going through the same path, and no one can be created inside a frame. They'll always be created on the start of the next frame, which also has a certain purity to it that feels like it might pay big dividends. So we don't have to worry about something getting created in the middle of a frame where half the people are updated. I don't know. Could be good. All right, so I guess I'm going to call that done for now. So I'll go ahead and hit the Q&A. Yeah, I do kind of agree that the debugging world is gets kind of weird, and that's actually kind of the way debug code goes. Uh, you know, there are some pretty gruesome things created during debugging. You know, um, some parade of horribles. There's definitely a fair bit of that, and I don't really know. Um, I don't really know what to say. A lot of times, 3D when you're programming in 3D, it can be even worse because you mess up a little thing in a transform somewhere, in how that's supposed to be. You got a bug somewhere like that, and suddenly people are getting all smushed around and distorted like really gruesomely. And so in 2D, it's a little better because you're only typically stretching like we were. It maybe doesn't, not so likely to get awful. Um, but yeah. Ramelli, why don't the clone players jump to points when their heads move over them? So it's a good question, and the reason is because if you look at where we just chose to do the code for that, we're doing it inside the controller binding for a hero head, right? Now we don't have to do that. We could choose to do it outside the controller binding for the hero head if that's what we wanted. And so, you can see in here there's a certain degree of where Con Hero is actually getting used, and you can see it right through here, but it stops at some point, right? So we could, for example, take this piece of code. I don't know why timer recenter. I guess because this code needs to know what that is. But we could make it so that the hopping didn't require a connected hero, right? It didn't require knowledge of like the pushing around. And in order to do that, it's actually pretty trivial. So I don't know. Do we write to Con Hero here ever? Well, I'll show you. So what we could do if we wanted to have that happen is we can make it so that our controlled hero has sort of like a dummy thing, like let's say Con Hero underscore, that's just nothing. And then in here we could say like, okay, we got let me back that up a second. More like this. So we'd sort of say this sort of thing. We want to know who's connected to this guy, and maybe nobody is, right? Like maybe no one's connected to him. And we don't really have a way to look it up, so we're just searching to see if we can find it, right? So in here what we're doing is saying like, okay, let's initialize the connected hero to be just nothing. It's just a garbage here, like a non-active hero controller. And then in here we'll say like, all right, let's take the test hero and see whether the test hero, we're looking at the 4 controllers, is any, or well, however many controllers there are, we're looking to see if any one of those controllers is attached to this hero. If it is, we're going to use that as the controller for this hero, right? Then we could just come out here and say, all right, everything else just assumes that we've got a valid one of those and operates. So now you don't have to have a connected hero to do the rest of the things that you were going to do. And off you go, right? So if we did that, then I think, now the controller code runs whether you have someone, I shouldn't say controller code, the logic for the hero head will now run whether or not anyone's plugged into it, right? So normally, like, I'm hopping around and it's fine, but if I was to, do sort of the thing where I switch heroes, now the controller code will run. Now what you'll notice is this means the hero will always stop, and that's because there's that spring on the hero head that keeps it close to the body. So if we wanted to, we would also have to do something if we wanted the heroes to sort of go in a direction, so you could see them hopping. What we would need to do is make it so that, well, when a hero doesn't have a connected entity, we're going to have to push. We're going to have some push in that direction, right? So we're going to have the hero's DDPX, let's say, equal to something, like in this case. Oops. What's going on? Okay, there we go. So if we initialize that, they'll all go that direction, right? So if I put one here, it's just going to act like there's a controller that it's pushing him towards, wherever he's going, right? Which is pretty funny, as you can see. So there's that. And I feel like at that point, if if that's the sort of thing that we're doing, you probably want to make the add player code right when we do the get closest traversables code for that, and we place them down. What we're probably going to want to do here is say, well, let's add an unoccupied flag for get closest traversable. So in the sim region, when we call get closest traversable, we're going to want something here that's like, a traversable flag or a traversable search flag. And we're going to want something like traversable search unoccupied equals OX1 or something. And so then in here we'd have a thing where we're like, okay, oh, Alan, loving that alignment, dude. So good. I was really missing that from Emacs, and now I don't have to miss that at all. That's so nice. All right, so, we got the flags. In here we could say, well, just search for an unoccupied traversable. And in here we'll just say, get close to traversable, blah, blah, blah. And so what I was saying here was, well, okay, inside here, when we're checking these, in addition to checking the other stuff, we could just say, well, all right, if the P that you were doing, oh, well, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. So this is a bogus indentation, right? Because that if should be over here, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. But it seems to want to push it in. All right, anyway. So we've got this point, and we're going to say if flags and traversable search unoccupied, if that's not set, then it's fine. But if that is set, then the P dash occupier has to be nothing. There can't be anyone on it, right? And so that's just something that we want to do with this traversable search. So now we'll find the closest point that isn't occupied, and that's where we'll actually put the player. Now, if we do that, now we can stop adding the player at camera P. Well, first of all, I should test that code. So now what I should be able to do is drop people down on top of me, in theory, right? Oh my god. Oh my god, that's so creepy. That is doing what I wanted it to do, but it's not... It's finding the point, but it's not putting them on it, and I can't say I know why. What does add player do for placement? Oh my god, that was creepy. Ah, so add player is kind of busted here, right? We need to know where that actual it's gotta add it to it at an actual place in the world, and we're not doing that at the moment. So yeah, we're gonna need to do something like, if that's the traversable reference, we would want to do, this is game world mode. We're probably gonna want to do like, sim region. I may have bitten off a little bit more than I could chew in 15 minutes, unfortunately. I just want to be able to place people around me, right? And I'm not sure. So the problem is, when I call add player, I need to be able to get the position as a world position. I guess that's not that tough. I guess I could say map into chunk space region. Let me see here. So the sim region origin, right? We've got this sort of concept of the sim region origin. So I could say region, worlds, sim region origin, and then I just want to map into chunk space whatever the traversable traversable. I just want that point. Get sim space traversable standing on. And I suppose that is an okay way to do it. The only difference is this: I've got to pass the sim region, but that's okay because whenever we add a player, we have one of those because they come in active at the moment. So yeah. So I think that'd work, but I don't know. I did it rather quickly. Now, still not right. Because that's still adding the player at that location. Oh, because we're calling it at camera P. All right, so I've got a little bit more work to do here. When we call it at camera P, I actually want to call it at the entity location. So what I actually wanted here is for this to come down. I don't know why star con hero equals that at this point. We don't really need that. So I guess I can maybe make a flying leap at this. So what I want to do is I want to say, well, I'll just store whether I wanted to make one of these like I do everything else. So the con hero, handmade.h, handmade.h, there we go. Oops. Where is con hero? There it is. We'll do like debug spawn or something like this, and I'll just say like debug spawn equals true. And then I'll just grab this out, and I'll do it down when we actually we're sort of doing the controlled hero stuff. So here I'll say like, oh hey, if the test hero debug spawn, we'll do this sort of weird crazy thing that we do. And in here, when I pass camera P instead, now I'll pass entity P. Oh, oh my. The other thing we got to do, clear that variable. Otherwise, we would just spawn all day. All right, so almost there. Might as well just finish it up. So when I spawn here, it's still not picking the right location. So something about traversable search unoccupied, I messed up that code in my haste. So let's take a look at get closest traversable. So if the flags is not, if we don't have an unoccupied set, then obviously we can check this flag. Or if the occupier of the point I'm testing is 0, then I can check it. That seems correct. So what did I do wrong there? Because if the p occupier equals 0, it will always work, which is what I want. I guess I could take the flag out of it for a second. Of course, that'll create other problems. So it's not even the flag. That just doesn't seem to work. I say. I mean, that passes back a copy of the... Yeah. So I wonder if we just don't want to actually ever pass back by value there. I guess we have to if we're saying get space, because you couldn't write to it, but I guess that's okay. I'll allow it. Basically, we need to copy in the occupier, right? Because we weren't ever copying that in. All right. So let's see here. So that's all good, and now occupying. Let me get closest traversable. So that's all correct now, and so let's just finish this off and say, all right, in Handmade world mode, when we do debug spawn. You know what I might say is let's actually make it so that we don't override the one that we are. So now we're basically just spawn people from our location rather than actually have them take over, right? So now we can kind of just go along and just add new people, right? Seems like a good thing to do. This is kind of ridiculous, and I admit that. But what can you do? I'm also sort of interested to know profile-wise what happens here. So yeah, you know, you can see our crappy physics stuff is definitely not up to this task either, right? Which is fine, right? We know we have to. It's not that routine is complete garbage, but it's just kind of interesting to know when you start putting some actual entities in here, who gets upset and a lot of it's there because there's a lot of calls to it. It looks like, how do you pause that? There we go. It looks like also we've got just the unpack and so on. Now this is not a debug. This is a debug build, so everything takes a lot longer. So that's not really that. But anyway, all right. Now I think we're good. We've settled that issue of having lots of creepy dudes, which is important. All right, I'm gonna wind up. Let's take a look. So I think we only had one four-coder weirdness today, which is that the if aligned itself with a drop indent of a line. So it was like, let's see if that's reproducible. Not so much. So it looks like it may be specific to that, or some of the surrounding things were important there. So hopefully we caught that on the stream. Anyway, otherwise we didn't have any other indentation problems. Thank you everyone for joining me for another episode of Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you as always. If you would like to follow along with the series at home, you can always pre-order the game on handmadehero.org, and it comes with the source code, so you can follow along with the development. We also have a forum site you can go to if you want to ask questions, a Patreon page if you want to support the video series, a schedule bot where you can follow you can see what the schedule for the week is, and an episode guide you can use to catch up on past episodes. As always, the editor we used on the stream is 4Coder, which just shipped a new version recently and is getting pretty formidable. You can support that project on Patreon. I don't know how to get there. There it is. You can support that project on Patreon by pledging on here, and you can get a copy of the editor early. And also, our episode guide, of course, is done by our very own Miblo from the chat, and you can actually support him. Well, you know what the easiest way to do it is if you go to the episode guide itself. You can see his Patreon link right here. Tell him you got to make it bigger, but no one's made it bigger yet. So those are some people you could support as well if you like the series and are looking for a way to support the people who, I guess, make it possible now. We also have, really have to kind of put a little thing in here that lists who the other people are. Our editor we actually also recently switched to a new graphic editor also being done by someone on the stream. So we got a lot of them now. And that one I don't have a convenient link to yet. It's called Milton. And so you can go and find it on here, but I need to get a better link to it because it's hard to find. But yeah, slowly but surely, and through a lot of generous support from people, we're slowly getting to the point where we have like really good workable replacements for all the stuff we were using, which is kind of cool. Anyway, that's it for today. I will catch you guys. Tomorrow's day off. I will catch you guys Wednesday. Until then, have fun programming, and I will see you guys on the internet. Take it easy, everyone.